Hey guys, tonight we step straight into the sandals of a Roman legionary, and fair warning, you probably won't survive this. The recruitment office is already crowded, a line of nervous young men stretching along the dusty street, each one shifting on calloused feet, staring at the polished helmet of the officer who looks at you as if you're already guilty of weakness. You smell sweat, old leather, and the faint metallic tang of sharpened blades. It's not a welcome mat, it's a gauntlet. And you, lucky listener, are about to stumble right into it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing exactly where and when my sleepy travelers are tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward, the sand crunching underfoot, a donkey braying in the distance as if mocking your nerves. The officer doesn't smile. He doesn't need to, he just points. Next, that's you. You step into a shaded stall, your heart beating like a drum at a festival, except there's nothing festive about this. The Roman military has a reputation. It takes anyone, everyone, or so you've heard, the truth. It's less about glorious destiny, and more about whether your body looks like it, can carry a shield without crumbling. The first indignity comes quickly. You strip. Not completely, but enough that the examiner can poke, prod, and glance at you as though you were livestock in the market. You stand there, shivering even though the air is warm, trying to remember if that strange mole on your shoulder counts as a defect. One of the quirks of Roman recruitment is that they cared less about noble birth and more about raw physical capacity. They wanted stocky arms, sturdy calves, and a chest that could gulp down air after hours of marching. A farmer's son, perfect. A city baker with flour-dusted hands. Maybe a scrawny poet, forget it, though honestly you don't look much better right now. And here's the kicker. Historians still argue whether the Romans truly checked for flat feet, but in your case, that examiner definitely notices when you roll inwards as you try to stand straight. His eyebrow arches, and for a moment you're sure you're out. But no, he jots something down and waves you forward. Congratulations. You've just passed the Roman medical exam, which says more about Rome's desperation for manpower than your superior athletic form. The officer rattles off questions, your age, your birthplace, whether you've ever killed a man before. You answer truthfully, though you notice the guy ahead of you lied shamelessly, swearing he once fought off bandits with nothing but a spade. The officer didn't even blink. In truth, the recruiters often adjusted answers to meet quotas. You're not special, you're a number, a body to fill a formation. And it doesn't take long for you to realize you've signed away not a few years, but potentially the rest of your useful life. Somewhere in the background, a centurion barks an order, his vine staff cracking against the ground like a warning. You swallow hard. That sound will soon be your alarm clock, your daily companion, and if you're unlucky, the sting on your back when you mess up. You're marched toward the supply table, where a clerk scratches your name onto a wax tablet. Welcome to Rome's mighty legions. You're now officially property of the state. Your first reward, an awkward handshake with reality. They hand you a token payment, just a taste of the wages you'll supposedly earn. It's pitiful enough to buy a loaf of bread and maybe a jug of vinegar-thin wine. The recruiters don't tell you about deductions. Money shaved off for equipment, for clothing, even for food. By the time the state is done charging you for your own existence, your pay will look suspiciously like nothing. Funny how that works. A bag of gear lands in your arms with the weight of doom itself. Rough tunic, hobnailed sandals, a strip of cloth you'll soon call underwear, and the first hints of the tools that will define you. The sandals, caligy, are already stiff, their iron-studded soles clanking when you move. They'll last through countless marches, but only at the cost of your feet. The tunic scratches your skin, and you try not to imagine what will happen when it mixes with sweat and rain. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some new recruits were so overwhelmed, they tried to sneak away that very night. Roman officers were prepared for that, guards patrolled, bonds were checked, and deserters were hunted ruthlessly. You glance at the walls of the camp, high and sharp, and realize you won't be leaving unless someone says you can. Your old life, your friends, your family, your favorite tavern, they're all already slipping into memory. The Legion doesn't wait for homesickness to pass. That night, you're shown to a cramped leather tent shared with 7 other recruits. You barely know their names, but their snoring will soon become as familiar as your own thoughts. The canvas flaps in the wind, and you try to settle onto the straw mat beneath you, wondering if you've made a colossal mistake. The truth is, you didn't make this choice at all. Rome made it for you, and tomorrow, the real ordeal begins. You wake to the rasping call of the bucina, the Roman bugle, slicing through the pre-dawn chill like a knife. Your feet hit the cold, uneven ground, and immediately you feel the bite of the caligy, already digging into the soles of your tired arches. 40 pounds of gear, shield, sword, armor, pack, hangs from your body as though a dozen small men are pinning you down. You try to adjust the straps, but they cut into your shoulders, wrists, and hips. You curse under your breath, realizing that the first trial of the day isn't battle, it's simply moving without collapsing. The centurion struts down the line, inspecting posture and speed, and his glare makes your spine stiffen involuntarily. Faster, he barks, and suddenly the ground becomes a blur under your laces. You shuffle, march, and stumble along with the others, each step a painful reminder that your feet were never meant to endure this kind of torture. Blisters bloom like small, angry islands on your toes and heels. You try to ignore them, but the rubbing leather and the weight of your pack conspire to make every step agony. Historically, Roman legions could cover 20 to 30 miles a day carrying everything you're lugging. That sounds almost heroic until you try it yourself. Your legs burn, your lungs scream for air, and your knees threaten mutiny. Historians still argue whether the famed forced marches were exaggerated by writers, or if the pace truly broke most new recruits within days. You don't care, they feel real, and you're living every excruciating second. Along the route, you pass villages, streams, and mud-choked roads. The smell is a curious mix of manure, smoke, and sweat, yours and everyone else. You notice a small stream glinting under the weak sun. Others crouch to drink, you do the same and instantly regret it. The water is tepid, muddied, and has the faint aroma of algae, yet you swallow it anyway. Survival trumps dignity. A quirk of Roman marches, soldiers were expected to find and drink from whatever water was available, no matter how dubious. Some wrote home about the refreshing springs, though clearly they were lying to comfort loved ones. Your stomach grumbles. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a hardtack biscuit handed out in silence. It's tough, dry, and almost unchewable, yet you gnaw it down anyway. The centurion eyes you as you eat, noting your slow chewing. Efficiency, soldier, he snaps. You swallow grit along with crumbs. Vinegar-based posca, the legion's signature drink, follows. You glare at the mug, thinking that humans survived on this fermented swill for centuries. Somehow they did, though you suspect Romans were more accustomed to misery than taste. March continues, the formation tightens. Shields clang, leather squeaks, and the sun rises higher, roasting your neck and shoulders. Sweat pours into your eyes, stinging like tiny daggers. You glance sideways at a comrade who's limping heavily. His foot has ballooned from friction, yet he doesn't stop. You wonder whether you'll reach his level of stubbornness, or collapse before your pride can carry you forward. The centurion's eyes sweep past you. You're barely moving fast enough to stay out of trouble. Punishment is always nearby, and deserters are treated like criminals, sometimes executed on the spot. Quirky detail, some legionaries used mouse fur or wool stuffed into their sandals to protect their feet. It sounds bizarre, but desperate people find strange solutions when standard-issue caligae are merciless. You briefly consider it, but there's no time. The sun climbs, sweat soaks the tunic you just got used to, and every mile feels like a loop in some cruel nightmare. You stumble upon a shallow river crossing. The water bites at your ankles. You're told to keep formation, to march in step while balancing over slick stones. You falter once, twice, and nearly topple your comrades. A tiny ripple in the formation could cost lives, or at least a brutal reprimand. The centurion shouts again, and your ears ring. You grit your teeth and trudge on. The day stretches endlessly. Hills, valleys, and flat stretches become interchangeable. You can barely recall the color of the sky because your focus is consumed entirely with keeping your feet moving, your shoulders upright, your mind from collapsing into despair. By midday, the blisters have joined forces, each step a fresh betrayal. You're learning the harsh reality. Roman marches weren't just a method of travel. They were a filter, sorting the weak from the strong, the persistent from the foolish. And right now, you're teetering precariously on the edge of failure. By afternoon, when the camp finally comes into view, you're physically transformed. Your uniform is sodden, your body aches in ways you didn't know possible, and your pride is battered. Yet there's a strange exhilaration in reaching the gates, a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that you survived another day, and dread for the next. Because tomorrow you'll do it again, and the day after. And the day after that, the morning sun is barely cresting the horizon when the bugle tears through the camp once more. Your body, still tender from yesterday's march, protests violently as you roll out of the straw mat you share with the other recruits. There's no time to linger over aches and complaints. Today you will train. And when I say train, I mean your entire body, mind, and dignity will be challenged until you wonder if your soul is somehow on the chopping block too. You trudge toward the training yard, the air thick with dust and sweat. Wooden swords lean against racks like innocent toys, but they are deceptive. Each piece weighs more than a real gladius, designed to strengthen your arms and shoulders. You pick one up, immediately grimacing as it drags your muscles down into protest. A centurion claps his hands sharply, positions, shoulder, shoulder, forward march. You stumble to the line, surrounded by men who, by the look in their eyes, have already accepted that survival is the only goal. Drills start immediately. You thrust, parry, duck, and lunge, your wooden weapon crashing against another recruit's. The sound echoes like a small army of hammers on stone. You sweat so profusely that your grip slips, and the instructor shouts, again, 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 there's no mercy. A historical fact, Roman soldiers often trained 6 to 8 hours a day with weapons before ever seeing a battlefield. Quirky tidbit, some centurions would balance stones on recruits' shoulders while they drilled to simulate the fatigue of actual combat. You think, with every protest of your shoulders, that someone might have invented this just to be cruel. By mid-morning, formations begin. Shields are strapped on and you march in tight lines, pivoting as the officer commands. You fall out of step once and immediately feel the sting of a leather thong across your back, a reminder that discipline isn't just suggested, it's enforced. Historians still argue whether decimation, the execution of 1 in 10 men for failure, was frequent or symbolic. You don't need the debate to understand fear. It hangs over the training yard like a low fog. Lunch is brief and functional, hardtack and posca. You chew mechanically, feeling your arms and legs begin to tremble from exhaustion. Your comrades share brief glances, silent understanding passing between you. Some try to joke about surviving, but the humor is brittle, a fragile shield against the relentless drills. The sun climbs relentlessly, baking the yard. Sweat runs into your eyes, stings, and mixes with the dust coating your skin. You're learning that Roman training wasn't about fun or skill building. It was about breaking the human body and teaching it to obey. After lunch comes obstacle drills. You clamber over walls, leap across ditches, and crawl under low-hanging ropes. Each movement reminds you of every body part that aches: wrists, shoulders, calves, and that ever-present blister on your right heel. You notice a recruit using a small pouch of mouse fur stuffed in his sandals, an old trick for pain relief. You consider it, but there's no time. You stumble again, and the instructor yells so sharply it sounds like the air itself has cracked. Then the highlight or lowlight of the day, mock battles. You are shoulder to shoulder with your cohort, shield against shield, lunging and striking with wooden gladii. The dust rises in clouds, sweat drenches your tunic. And your arms tremble with the weight of both shield and weapon. Every misstep draws reprimand, every stumble is noted. You realize quickly that the mock battle simulates real combat, but with a certainty of punishment that war itself may not match. Quirky fact, some recruits were so overworked they would faint mid-drill, only to be hauled back to their positions by their comrades and centurions alike. By late afternoon, you collapse briefly, only to be pulled up for a run around the camp. Your lungs burn, your legs scream, and your mind teeters on the brink of despair. The centurion watches with cold amusement, reminding you with a simple nod that quitting is not an option. You remember that wooden sword you lifted this morning. It is now heavier, but you carry it anyway, because the alternative, failure, is far worse. Evening comes, but the drills don't truly end. You have cleaning duties, armor maintenance, and a short inspection. Your blisters throb, your muscles protest, and every inch of skin feels like it has been sanded down by the relentless sun and straps. You collapse into your straw mat at night, body aching in a way you never imagined possible, and realize that this is what Roman soldiers lived through daily before they even saw a battlefield. This is what the glory was made of: pain, repetition, and relentless discipline. As you drift into a fitful sleep, you dream of collapsing entirely, of shedding the heavy gear, of walking barefoot through soft grass instead of marching endlessly. And yet, somewhere deep inside, you know tomorrow it will start all over again. The dawn drum of the buchner cuts through the tent again, and your stomach twists in protest. You thought yesterday's march and today's drills were merciless. Wait until you meet Roman rations. You trudge to the mess area, hopping foolishly for a warm meal. Instead, you are handed a hard, nearly rock-like biscuit and a small mug of posca. You gag slightly. Hardtack isn't just dry, it's intentionally dense, designed to last long campaigns, and posca tastes like someone squeezed a vinegar barrel into a cup and then handed it to you with a wink. You chew mechanically, waterless, trying not to imagine that some soldiers have survived entire marches and minor skirmishes on precisely this meager diet. Historical fact: Roman soldiers, rations typically included barley, wheat, and occasional salted meat. Fringe tidbit: some legionaries reportedly added ashes or urine to their wine to soften the taste. Archaeologists are still unsure how widespread this practice was. You don't plan to try that, though the thought crosses your mind as you grimace at the posca. Historians still argue whether posca actually provided significant nutritional value or was mostly psychological comfort. You decide it's mostly psychological, with a generous splash of stomach-churning acid. Breakfast finished or barely started, you march to the construction site. Today isn't combat, it's fort building. You thought you'd swing a sword or thrust a spear. Wrong. You spend hours hauling stones, digging trenches, and erecting timber palisades under the watchful eye of the centurion. Each movement is laborious, the sweat pouring down your back mixing with the dust on your skin, forming a gritty paste. Your arms ache, your hands blister, and every stone seems heavier than the last. Some recruits have invented tricks, using the leverage of a plank to slide stones rather than lift them. You try it once, but the centurion spots you, frowns, and barks. Do it my way, soldier. Your innovation fails, and you resume the labor, cursing silently. Quirky fact: Romans sometimes measured soldier productivity by the number of stones moved per hour, rather than construction quality. You briefly wonder if your value as a soldier is purely numeric. Lunchtime arrives, if you can call it that, another meager ration of barley gruel, this time warmed by the sun rather than fire. You sip the liquid reluctantly, and it feels like swallowing wet sand. You glance at comrades who seem almost cheerful in their misery, spitting bits of gruel into the dirt when the centurion isn't looking. You're not at that level yet. Survival still demands swallowing every unpleasant bite. By mid-afternoon, you're covered in sweat, grime, and a general layer of exhaustion. The fortifications are taking shape, the ditches and wooden spikes forming what will someday be considered an impregnable position. You've dug a trench deep enough that your muscles scream in protest, yet the centurion inspects and nods, satisfied, before moving to the next row of men. Fringed tidbit, soldiers occasionally inscribed humorous or ironic messages on wooden planks during fort construction, ancient graffiti hidden in plain sight. You suppress a laugh, imagining leaving your mark with, "I survived another day, barely." The day ends with cleaning duties, repairing your gear, and a brief inspection of your tunic and sandals. The sun sets red behind distant hills, and you realize the workday has lasted longer than most you've endured outside the Legion. Your back aches, your arms feel like they've been replaced by lead, and your stomach is grumbling again despite the minimal intake of food. You think about lying down and refusing to get up, but instinctively, you know the centurion would catch you. That night you eat in near silence, the gruel tasting even worse than breakfast, and you hear whispers of comrades claiming the vinegar drink is actually a decent substitute for wine in terms of morale. You doubt it, but your body doesn't protest too loudly, you're too exhausted to care. You slump into your straw mat afterward, limbs trembling, dreaming of a soft bed and a warm meal, things forbidden luxuries in this new existence. By the flickering lantern light, you contemplate that soldiers who survive Roman life do so through sheer stubbornness, adaptability, and a willingness to endure discomfort most humans would flee. You realize faintly that these small indignities, rations, gruel, vinegar, back-breaking labor, are merely the prelude to even greater trials ahead. Yet tonight, as your eyes finally close, you learn a small, harsh truth. You might not last a day in the Legion, but if you do, every meal march and misery is just training for survival itself. Dawn arrives again, and with it the relentless drum of the Buchner. You lift your sore, blistered body from the straw mat, each movement a careful negotiation with your limbs. Today is not combat, not even marching. Today you are a laborer. You trudge to the worksite, following the older, more seasoned legionaries who move with the ease of people who have accepted this as life. Their muscles are thick, their hands calloused beyond recognition, and their eyes carry the faint glow of people who have long since stopped questioning why they endure. You receive your orders, dig a trench along the perimeter, haul timber for palisades, and help erect temporary shelters for the camp. Each movement feels heavier than the last. Your arms quiver under the weight of a timber beam, and your legs threaten mutiny as you climb over uneven ground with a spade in one hand and a bucket of stones in the other. You can almost hear your muscles whispering, "This is not what humans are meant to do all day." And yet you march on because the alternative, a beating or worse, is not appealing. Historical fact: Roman soldiers spent more time constructing camps, roads, and fortifications than fighting. You may imagine glorious battles, but in reality, the day-to-day grind of the Legion was sweat, dirt, and endless labor. Fringe tidbit: some soldiers carved intricate patterns or symbols into the wooden palisades they built, a small rebellion of artistry in a life otherwise stripped of comfort. You run your fingers over a plank and secretly admire the craftsmanship, even if your hands ache too much to replicate it. The centurion circles, inspecting each recruit, measuring effort with a ruthless eye. You drop a bucket accidentally. The clatter echoes across the camp and a sharp whistle cuts through the air. Do it again, properly this time. Your cheeks burn, partly from exertion and partly from embarrassment. Historians still argue whether these punishments were consistently applied or selectively cruel, but you don't need scholarship to know the fear is real. Lunch arrives in the form of more barley gruel, supplemented with a few scraps of salted meat if you're lucky. The rations are small, designed to sustain, not satisfy. You chew mechanically, swallowing the gritty mixture without complaint, though every bite reminds you that the Legion teaches endurance, not indulgence. You glance at a comrade secretly smuggling a piece of cheese from his pack, and you envy him. You resolve to be smarter next time, though the centurion's gaze is everywhere, so cunning must be balanced with caution. Afternoon brings heavier construction. Stones, earth, and timber combine into fortifications meant to protect the camp from both weather and enemy. Your hands blister further, your back feels like it might snap. Quirky detail: some legionaries supposedly trained using logs that were deliberately unbalanced, simulating awkward loads to make carrying real supplies easier. You curse whoever came up with that brilliant idea, silently acknowledging that this might be the one thing that finally breaks your resolve. By evening, the camp stands slightly improved, trenches dug deeper, palisades straighter, shelters assembled with uneven yet determined effort. You collapse onto your straw mat once again, your body soaked in sweat and coated in a layer of dust that no bath will remove for days. You reflect on the brutal reality. The Roman legion isn't just an army, it's a machine, and you are a gear within it. Every hour spent building, hauling, and digging is preparation for a war you may or may not even fight. Sleep comes reluctantly as your mind replays every dropped bucket, every misstep, every shouted order. You realize that survival in the Legion is about more than strength. It is patience, endurance, and a grim sense of humor. You have survived the marches, the rations, and now the labor, but the road ahead promises even more challenges. And somehow, despite every blister and backache, you know that giving up isn't an option. Not yet morning breaks with the same relentless insistence, and you find yourself begrudgingly rising from the straw once more. Today, the focus shifts from labor to your armor, the very thing that will define you in both drill and battle. You approach the armory, eyeing the rows of gladii, scuta, lorica segmentata, and helmets like a kid facing a candy store he isn't allowed to touch. You lift your shield first, and it immediately feels like carrying a small wall. The leather straps bite into your forearm, your shoulder aches, and you wonder if the Romans secretly designed this torture to test patience as much as strength. You fasten the lorica segmentata, the overlapping iron plates pressing against your chest and shoulders. Already you can feel every movement impeded. The armor isn't forgiving, it pinches, scratches, and makes even simple actions a challenge. A historical fact, Roman armor was a marvel of engineering, offering significant protection without sacrificing mobility, but only if you could survive the first week of wearing it. Fringed tidbit, some recruits greased their undertunic with animal fat to reduce chafing under the metal, though this often attracted swarms of biting insects. You make a mental note to try this later, though right now the weight alone is daunting. With shield strapped and sword sheathed, you march into formation. The centurion inspects the line, tapping his vine staff against shields, listening for alignment and noting anything amiss. You shift slightly, and the clank of your armor echoes harshly. "Attention," he bellows. Your heart skips a beat, and you straighten as much as your aching body allows. Historians still argue whether the ceremonial precision of armor drills significantly improved battlefield performance, or was mostly psychological. But you don't have time for debate. You have to keep your balance. You notice the gladius, deceptively light in appearance, digging slightly into your ribs when drawn. You swing it experimentally, the weight manageable but awkward. The shield, however, dominates your other arm. Every step, every pivot, every lunge reminds you that mobility comes at a cost, fatigue and bruising. Quirky detail, some recruits reportedly placed small strips of leather between straps and skin to prevent bruising, a rudimentary form of padding that became essential for long campaigns. You consider this a necessary survival hack and make a mental note. Training in full armor begins. You're instructed to practice thrusts, parries, and shield maneuvers in formation. The sun climbs relentlessly and sweat trickles between the metal plates, burning and stinging. You stumble once, your shield tipping slightly, and the instructor slaps your shoulder with a leather thong. Pain shoots down your arm, and you realize that even mistakes are costly. Discipline here is a tangible force, enforced with sticks, words, and intimidation. The day continues with obstacle courses in full gear. You clamber over walls, crawl under ropes, and leap ditches while every plate and strap conspires to slow you down. Your legs wobble, your arms shake, and your back complains bitterly. Fringe tidbit, some legionaries carried extra weights during training to simulate the unpredictability of battlefield conditions, such as carrying wounded comrades or extra equipment. You think briefly that this is madness, but then, in a grim way, you admire the ingenuity. By evening, you are covered in sweat and grime, bruises forming along the edges of your armor. The centurion gives a final inspection, and you dare a glance around at your comrades. Their faces show equal exhaustion, some exhilaration, and a strange sense of pride that survives even amid misery. You collapse onto your straw once more, armor removed at last, and feel almost human again, if only briefly. As you drift towards sleep, you reflect that Roman armor isn't merely protection, it's a masterclass in endurance, forcing the body to adapt while testing the spirit. Every scrape, pinch, and bruised limb is preparation for the battles ahead. And even as you rest, a nagging thought lingers. If surviving armor drills is this brutal, what horrors await when real combat finally comes? The bugle wakes you again, but today there's a difference in the air. The centurion's gaze is sharper, his movements more deliberate, and the tension among the recruits is palpable. Today isn't about marches or armor, it's about discipline, that invisible but omnipresent force that keeps the legion functioning like a single, relentless machine. You trudge toward the training yard, aware that every misstep could mean a flogging, extra duties, or worse. The morning begins with a simple drill, formation alignment. You're supposed to move as one, step in sync, shield raised at precisely the right angle. A slight wobble in your line draws a shout from the centurion, and you instantly feel the sting of a leather thong against your shoulder. Pain blooms, sharp and immediate, but the lesson is clear. Perfection isn't optional. A historical fact: Roman soldiers were trained to obey commands instantly, often under threat of severe punishment, to maintain cohesion in chaotic battlefields. Fringe tidbit: decimation, the execution of 1 in 10 men as punishment, was rare but terrifying enough to keep fear deeply rooted. You wonder how anyone kept their sanity with such pressure. Next comes weapons discipline. You draw your gladius and the instructor watches like a hawk. You parry and thrust as commanded, each movement scrutinized. If your timing is off, if your posture falters, the instructor does not hesitate to shout, hit, or humiliate. Some recruits are forced to repeat movements hundreds of times until muscle memory is perfect. Quirky detail: legionaries sometimes trained with sandbags strapped to their backs to simulate the exhaustion of carrying a comrade from the battlefield. You grimace at the thought: how are humans supposed to survive this regimen? By mid-morning, punishment drills begin. One recruit drops his shield slightly, and the centurion smacks him with a stick, forcing him to start over. Another has his tunic tucked incorrectly, and he is ordered to run laps under the scorching sun while the others maintain their positions. Historians still argue whether the psychological pressure of these drills was more effective than actual combat training, but you don't need studies. You feel it in every muscle, every bead of sweat, every anxious glance. Lunch is the usual barley gruel and posca, eaten silently in the shadow of the palisade. You chew mechanically, trying not to think about what awaits after the meal. More drills, more scrutiny, more relentless attention to minor mistakes. You realize that this life is about obedience as much as strength. Quirky tidbit: soldiers occasionally devised secret signals to warn comrades of centurion inspection, a tiny rebellion that was tolerated as long as it didn't disrupt overall discipline. You smirk faintly at the thought of such cleverness amidst misery. The afternoon is a gauntlet of punishments and endurance tests. You are made to carry extra weight, march in formation under the sun, and repeat sword drills with increasing speed. The centurion walks along the line, eyeing posture, alignment, and effort. A single lapse draws a harsh correction. A repeated lapse might be met with public humiliation. You quickly learn that the system is unforgiving. As the day drags on, your muscles scream, and your mind teeters between exhaustion and fear. Each reprimand, each strike, each barked order is a reminder that in the Legion, survival depends on total submission to authority. You realize that this discipline, as brutal as it is what transforms raw recruits into soldiers capable of functioning as one organism on the battlefield. Evening falls, but the centurion isn't finished. There are inspections, cleaning duties, and minor tasks designed to keep you under control. You collapse into your straw mat at night, body aching, spirit bruised, but slowly understanding that discipline isn't punishment, it's a survival mechanism. And yet, somewhere in the back of your mind, you wonder if you can endure the next trial, when obedience will be tested not by drills, but by the chaos of actual combat. The camp stirs before dawn, the bugle's call cutting through the mist like a blade. Today you march not for drills, not for labor, but for the front lines. The distant hills blur in the morning light, and your heart pounds with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. You adjust your armor, heft your shield, and grip your gladius tightly. Every muscle is tense, every nerve alert. You realize with a shiver that the theoretical horrors you've endured during training were merely preparation. This is real, or as close to real, as the Legion can make it. You march in formation, shoulder to shoulder with your cohort, the ground trembling under the synchronized steps of hundreds of soldiers. Dust rises in clouds, swirling around your legs, coating your armor and tunic. The air is thick with anticipation, the metallic tang of sweat and iron biting at your nose. A historical fact: Roman legions relied heavily on tight formations like the testudo or tortoise formation to protect against missile attacks, requiring perfect coordination. Fringe tidbit: some soldiers carried small charms or inscriptions on their armor for luck, often invoking obscure gods or spirits to keep them safe. You glance at a comrade's crudely etched symbol and wonder if superstition will save anyone here. Trumpets blare as you approach the enemy line. You can barely make out the shapes ahead, a wave of opposing soldiers, banners snapping in the wind, weapons glinting under the sun. Fear tightens your chest, and yet training takes over. Your feet move in rhythm, shield interlocked with those of your neighbors, forming a human wall. The centurion shouts commands, and you obey instinctively, as if your life depends on it, because it does. Historians still argue whether formations were as effective in actual combat as drill practice suggested, but standing here, you don't question the reasoning. Arrows arc through the sky, darkening the sunlight momentarily. You feel the first sting of fear, not the physical pain, but the realization that mistakes here could be fatal. You tighten your grip on the shield, lean into the wall of bodies, and try to keep your pulse steady. A quirk of Roman battlefield psychology. Soldiers were trained to rely on the man next to them as much as themselves, creating a collective focus that sometimes overshadowed individual fear. You wonder if your training has drilled enough fear out of you, though doubt gnaws relentlessly. Clash comes suddenly. The enemy presses forward, swords meet shields with ringing clangs. Dust and sweat mix in your eyes, stinging, blurring vision. You thrust and parry, muscles screaming in protest, yet adrenaline propels you forward. A comrade yells, and you barely hear it over the cacophony of steel on steel, the shouted orders, and the pounding of hundreds of feet. Fringe tidbit: some soldiers chewed herbs to dull the scent of blood, supposedly calming nerves and improving focus. You taste dust instead, grit grinding between your teeth. Time stretches and warps in the chaos. Minutes feel like hours. A single formation step can determine life or death. The centurion's voice cuts through the noise, precise, commanding, unwavering. Your gladius finds an opening, your shield blocks a strike, and you experience the terrifying exhilaration of functioning as a single unit. Every instinct honed in training is tested simultaneously, and yet somewhere inside a whisper tells you, this is far worse than any drill, any march, any punishment. When the clash finally subsides, you are breathless, limbs trembling, armor dented, and tunic soaked in sweat. You survived, though barely, and glance around at comrades who are equally battered. The realization hits. Facing the enemy isn't just physical, it's a test of nerves, of fear management, and of cohesion. You are part of a machine, each cog essential, each step critical. As you march back to camp, the sun dipping low, your mind reels from what just occurred. Boredom and monotony may have been brutal, but this, the chaos, the noise, the pressure, is something else entirely. You realize, perhaps for the first time, why the Legion's training is so merciless. And even as exhaustion drags at your body, a strange, grim satisfaction creeps in. You live through your first battle, and somehow you are still standing. Morning arrives in the camp with the usual cacophony of bugle calls, the clatter of armor, and the low murmur of soldiers preparing for another day. But today there's no march, no drills, no imminent clash of swords. Today boredom rules. You trudge out of your straw mat, body still sore from yesterday's confrontation with the enemy, and shuffle toward the camp's center with nothing but small tasks ahead. You thought Legion life would be non-stop action. Wrong. Most of it is waiting, guarding, and enduring mind-numbing monotony. You are assigned to guard duty along the palisade. The sun climbs lazily, heat settling in your back as you lean against your shield. Hours pass with only the occasional movement of a fellow soldier or the distant clatter of supply wagons to break the monotony. Dust swirls in lazy spirals around your feet, and the smell of sweat, manure, and smoke from the campfires forms a constant haze. Historians still argue whether boredom and repetitive tasks were intended as mental conditioning or merely a consequence of maintaining order in vast camps. Either way, you're experiencing it firsthand. To distract yourself, you watch comrades play dice and other makeshift games. You consider joining, but your mind feels too afraid to strategize or bluff convincingly. A quirky detail: soldiers often played these games using bones or shards of pottery, long before dice were standardized, turning even simple downtime into a small, chaotic ritual. You smile faintly at the absurdity, realizing that even in misery, humans find ways to amuse themselves. Hours stretch into the afternoon. You scratch at the ever-present lice, swat at flies, and try not to think too hard about the heat and the aching of your muscles. Lunch consists of another Grulan-Posca combo, eaten with a mechanical detachment. Your taste buds have long given up. Survival has overridden pleasure entirely. Fringe tidbit: some soldiers reportedly save scraps from meals to trade for small comforts like extra Posca or a bit of cheese, though such trades were informal and risky. You wonder if you'll ever be clever enough to navigate these small economies. The afternoon continues with more tedious chores: repairing tents, hauling firewood, mending armor, and sweeping the camp square. You move automatically, every task a dull repetition of the last, every minute crawling as slowly as the sun across the sky. Quirky fact: legionaries sometimes carved crude illustrations or messages into wooden planks to mark time and stave off boredom. Ancient graffiti, proof that human creativity persists even under strict regimes. You try your hand at a small doodle but abandon it quickly, hands shaking from fatigue. Evening approaches and the camp remains bathed in a haze of heat and dust. You sit by the fire, watching comrades quietly prepare their evening rations. Conversations are muted, half-hearted, as everyone is too drained to muster genuine camaraderie. The monotony presses against you like a physical weight, a different kind of exhaustion than marches or battle. It's insidious, gnawing at patience and morale. As night falls, you crawl into your straw mat, muscles aching, mind numb, yet you find a strange reassurance in the rhythm of it all. Days like this are training too, a test of endurance, patience, and mental fortitude. You have survived marches, drills, armor, discipline, and now boredom itself. The Legion has a way of breaking you in all the necessary dimensions. And as you drift into a restless sleep, you realize that surviving boredom may be as crucial as surviving the enemy. The final sunrise of your current campaign streak filters weakly through the canvas of your tent. Your body protests each movement, joints stiff and bruises still tender, yet there's a strange sense of accomplishment. You've endured marches, drills, rations, fought construction, armor, discipline, battle, and boredom. Somehow, despite every hardship, you've lasted. But there's one last reality to face. Retirement, the elusive promise of land or a modest pension, a reward that keeps soldiers pushing through decades of hardship. The centurion strides past, inspecting the camp with an authoritative eye. You adjust your armor, now worn but familiar, your shield bearing dents and scratches from countless hours of labor and combat. You remember the first days, how every strap, stone, and bucket seemed insurmountable. Now each is a testament to endurance, a badge of survival. Historians still debate how often veterans actually received the promised land, and whether bureaucratic promises were honored at all. From what you've seen, survival through the ranks doesn't guarantee reward. It merely guarantees that you've made it this far. Today, you observe the veterans who have served the full 25 years. Some are retired, granted small plots of land on the fringes of the empire. Others remain, their bones weary but spirits intact. Fringe tidbit, retired legionaries sometimes settled together, forming colonies where military training and camaraderie carried on even in civilian life. You imagine yourself among them, a small piece of soil earned through blood, sweat, and an endless string of marches. Quirky thought, some retired soldiers even trained their children in basic military discipline, creating tiny mini-legions in the countryside. Morning drudgery is replaced with inspection, not as punishment but as ritual. You see comrades polishing armor, checking gladi, arranging shields in neat rows. It's strangely calming. This ceremony marks the transition from one stage of life to another, from the relentless churn of the legion to the quiet promise of survival and potentially prosperity. Your body aches, but your mind hums with reflection. Every trial, the marches, blisters, mock battles, boredom, has shaped you into someone who can endure almost anything. Lunch is simple, yet you savor it differently. Every bite feels like a small celebration, hardtack chewed with an awareness that you've survived years where each meal was barely sufficient. Posca still tastes sour, but you've grown accustomed to its bite, recognizing it as part of the ritual of Roman life. Your comrades share stories, mostly grumbles and absurd tales from campaigns past. You laugh quietly, the sound almost foreign after so many days of grim endurance. The afternoon stretches into ritual inspections, light construction, and personal reflection. You watch newer recruits, those still green and trembling under the weight of armor and responsibility. You recognize their fear, their clumsiness, and the gleam of hope that they too might survive. You remember your first days, the blisters, the hunger, the relentless discipline, and you feel a mix of empathy and pride. Quirky detail, some veterans were unofficially tasked with mentoring new recruits, getting them through the mental and physical trials of Legion life. You smile faintly, imagining passing on the hardened wisdom that could save lives. Evening settles gently, a softening of the day's harsh realities. You sit outside your tent, the sky painted in streaks of red and gold, feeling the residual aches of decades of service. Your thoughts drift to home, to small plots of land, to families who may never fully understand the rigor you endured. Yet in this moment there is a quiet pride. You have survived the Roman legion. You have endured what most would not even attempt. And while historians still debate the exact benefits and outcomes of long service, you know the truth. Survival itself is the reward. As night falls, you prepare for sleep, the world quieting around you. The bugle has long been silenced, the camp calm, and the distant stars twinkle like distant promises. Your body rests, though aches remain, and your mind drifts through the echoes of everything endured. You know the lessons of the Legion: endurance, discipline, resilience, and adaptation. These are gifts, forged in discomfort and trial, and they are yours forever. You start with the Polos, Niccolo and Maffi, traders who, despite their refined Venetian accents, have an insatiable itch for the road. Venice, with its labyrinthine canals, smells of brine and commerce, and as a young Marco, you grow up hearing stories of silk, gold, and spices from distant lands, stories that ignite something wild inside you. The city is a puzzle of narrow alleys, hidden courtyards, and bustling markets where Venetian merchants shout over each other, and you weave through this chaos, your curiosity already exceeding the capacity of your small frame. Your family home isn't a palace. It's a sturdy, timbered building overlooking a canal where gondoliers sing off-key, and the faint sound of church bells punctuates your afternoons. Your father, Niccolo, a stern but lively man, talks of trade missions to the east, recounting tales of goods flowing from Constantinople and beyond. Historians still argue whether Venice's trade networks shaped young Marco's ambitions, or if he was simply too restless to stay put. You get your first taste of the wider world not in libraries or classrooms, but in whispered exchanges between traders and sailors. They mention the lands of the Mongols, deserts that stretch endlessly, and rivers so wide that bridges feel absurdly inadequate. Your mind stretches with every tale. One quirky note you overhear, possibly a sailor's tall tale, is that somewhere in the east, men ride camels with bells on their knees to ward off spirits. You tuck that image away, knowing someday it might spark a memory or a story of your own. The Venetian lagoon itself is a teacher. You learn patience in the slow rocking of boats, courage when the tides surge unexpectedly, and the subtle art of bargaining at market stalls, which you will later wield like a sword. Venice's walls seem protective, yet confining, and every canal you trace with your gaze whispers, "There's more beyond this water." By the time you're a teenager, you're shadowing your father through warehouses stacked with bolts of silk, crates of dried figs, and jars of strange, aromatic powders. The clatter of coins, the hiss of barges, the smell of oil lamps, it all becomes part of you. Even the stray cats, padding silently along beams, teach you a sort of nimbleness, a quiet awareness of your surroundings. And of course, Venice has its darker corners. You might stumble across a hidden courtyard where water stagnates and smells of forgotten things. Here, merchants exchange not just goods, but secrets. Fringe stories seep in, like rumors that some Venetian families keep crocodile dung as sunscreen, a detail historians still debate, though it amuses you greatly as a child. You file it alongside tales of distant lands, each little absurdity sharpening your sense that the world is stranger than any story you've yet heard. Evenings are quieter. You sit on rooftops, listening to the hum of gondolas below, the click of oars, and imagine distant deserts, mountains, and courts filled with gold. Venice, for all its familiarity, feels like a doorway. You can almost feel the tug of the horizon, an invisible string pulling you toward lands you can barely name yet, toward stories you are destined to live. Your first lessons aren't academic, they are tactile. You watch as your father measures spices by weight, balances accounts, and negotiates with merchants whose languages twist like serpents. You imitate him, fumbling at first but quickly picking up the rhythm. Venice teaches you observation. Notice the subtle twitch in a trader's eye, the way a sailor's hands move when a storm approaches. These skills, seemingly mundane now, will later mean the difference between survival and disaster. And then there's the sensory overload. The laughter of street children, the smell of roasting meats, the clamor of boats docking and departing, the cold shock of canal water on bare feet. You drink it all in, a sponge for both fact and fancy, already dreaming of voyages that might carry you beyond this mosaic of stone and water. Venice, with its beauty and grime, its canals and crowds, molds you. You are not just a boy, you are the first steps of an explorer, sensing that the world is both enormous and oddly intimate, ready to be traversed one canal, one coast, one desert at a time. You trudge down the wooden gangplank of a merchant ship. The salt-laden wind whipping your hair into tangles, carrying with it the smell of brine, tar, and the faint hint of overcooked fish from the galley. The Mediterranean stretches endlessly before you, a liquid highway to lands that until now have only existed in your imagination. Venice recedes behind you, its jagged rooftops and maze-like canals shrinking into a postcard of memory. You probably won't survive the first weeks aboard without longing for the cobblestones you've left behind, but hey, that's the price of adventure. The ship rocks in rhythm with the waves, creaking ominously, and you quickly learn that seasickness is an unavoidable companion. You cling to the railing as seagulls swoop overhead, screeching like a chorus of impatient guides. The crew is a ragtag ensemble, seasoned sailors with leathery faces, young apprentices eager to prove themselves, and a few mysterious travelers whose languages sound like a jumble of bells and whistles. Historians still argue whether Marco Polo personally made all these Mediterranean crossings, or if some tales were later embellished. But from your perspective, every splash, every gust, every shouted command feels authentic. Days bleed into nights. You memorize the feel of the salt crusting on your skin, the sting of spray in your eyes, and the metallic tang of the wind. You help haul ropes, knot sails, and carry crates of goods, mostly silk, dried fruits, and scented oils, from Venice to ports along the Italian coastline. There's a rhythm to it, a strange harmony that the ship, the sea, and the crew create together. One quirky tidbit you overhear from an old sailor is that somewhere along the coast, pirates sometimes disguised themselves as floating cypress trees, a claim historians debate, though it makes your heart race every time you spot a suspicious shadow on the horizon. Your first nights under the stars are a revelation. The Milky Way stretches like a river of light above you, mirrored faintly in the black water below, and the creak of the ship's timbers becomes a lullaby of sorts. You make up stories to pass the time, imagining that the waves are whispering secrets of faraway lands, Persia, the Middle East, and perhaps even the court of the great Kublai Khan. You scribble these ideas on scraps of parchment, though the crew mostly chuckles at your youthful enthusiasm, calling you the dreamer of Venice. Port stops are no less stimulating. You taste olives so ripe they almost explode, sample wines sharper than the dagger at your father's belt, and trade small goods with merchants who speak in tongues you barely recognize. Venice's structured chaos is replaced by the foreign, unpredictable bustle of other ports, Alexandria, Acre, and perhaps even more distant harbors, each with its own smell, cadence, and flavor. You notice the subtleties, how a trader's gaze shifts when he suspects a scam, or how a fisherman's hands work with uncanny precision. These details, though minor now, will shape your perception of the vast world you intend to navigate. Storms arrive like angry spirits. Waves rise like walls, slamming the ship with a relentless power that makes your knees wobble. You cling to the railing as the crew shouts orders over the roar of the wind, and the smell of wet wood, salt, and fear fills the air. One fringe tale persists among sailors, that a sea monster once tipped a Venetian ship and stole a barrel of figs, but whether it's true is debated even by the most seasoned historians. The story, however, becomes a shared ritual, and you memorize it, tucked among the real terrors of navigating the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean isn't just water, it's a teacher of resilience. You learn the cadence of waves, the subtle shifts in wind, the signs that a storm is approaching before it's visible. You grow a tolerance for discomfort, the chafing ropes, the biting salt, the endless rocking, and a respect for unpredictability. Venice taught you observation, the sea teaches patience and adaptation. Conversations among the crew expand your horizon. You hear about camel caravans in the deserts of Persia, rivers so wide that they swallow the horizon, and mountains piercing the sky like jagged teeth. You file these in your memory, pairing them with sketches and crude maps, even as the debate among historians continues about whether Marco Polo witnessed these firsthand or compiled them from other travelers' tales. Quirky details stick out. Sailors talk of birds so large they can carry a man, or fish that glow in the dark. Stranger still, you start imagining that these creatures might greet you in your own journeys across deserts and mountains. By the time you near the eastern Mediterranean, the world feels simultaneously immense and intimately tangible. You know each knot of the ship's rigging, each swing of the mast, each unpredictable gust of wind. You start recognizing landmarks along the coast, and with each new port, your anticipation grows. Venice feels like a dream fading behind you, while the vast unknown stretches ahead. And in this growing excitement, you sense that every spray of sea foam, every shout from the crow's nest, and every whispered tale in the hold is just a prelude to the adventures that await in lands even stranger and more opulent than you can yet imagine. You trudge through the jagged mountain passes of Persia, the wind gnawing at your cheeks and carrying the scent of dust, herbs, and the faint tang of goat milk from distant herders. Every step demands attention. The stones are sharp, the slopes treacherous, and the air thin enough to make your lungs ache. You probably won't survive these climbs without tripping, slipping, or cursing under your breath, but hey, that's part of the adventure. Your caravan is a motley collection. Merchants laden with silks and spices, camels groaning under the weight of precious cargo, and an assortment of guides who speak in a dozen tongues. You marvel at the ingenuity of Persian traders, watching them negotiate deals with a precision that feels almost ritualistic. Historians still argue whether Marco Polo really participated in these exact caravans, or if he combined multiple journeys into one seamless narrative, but from your perspective, every encounter feels vividly real. The mountains are alive with oddities. You spy ibex clinging impossibly to cliff faces, their curved horns glinting in the sun, and hear stories from caravan leaders of snow leopards that stalk travelers, some truth, some tall tale. One particularly quirky claim circulates, that some Persian caravans employed acrobats who leapt from camel to signal danger or deliver messages. You file it away, skeptical yet fascinated, imagining yourself performing such daring feats in your future exploits. Nights in the mountains are surreal. You curl near a small fire, the embers casting flickering shadows on jagged rocks, and listen to distant echoes of howling wind. Stars pierce the darkness. Astonishingly bright because the air is thin and pure, and you imagine that if you reach far enough, you might touch the edges of the world itself. Persian legends float around the fire, tales of invisible spirits guarding hidden valleys, and one trader insists that singing a certain melody will make the mountains part to reveal a secret oasis. Historians debate whether these traditions are symbolic, literal, or slightly invented for curious foreigners like you. The caravan teaches survival in subtle ways. You learn to read the terrain, which paths avoid hidden crevices, which rocks are stable underfoot, and which slopes hide sudden avalanches. You discover that camels, despite their reputation for stubbornness, are remarkably sensitive to commands, capable of adjusting to every nuance in the rocky terrain. And the humans. Their ability to navigate danger with practiced calm becomes a lesson in patience and observation. Skills you realize will be invaluable when you cross deserts, rivers, and foreign courts later on. Food is sparse but flavorful. You nibble on dried figs, salted meat, and flatbread cooked on hot stones, marveling at how each flavor tells a story of geography, climate, and human ingenuity. Occasionally, you encounter exotic spices that hint at lands even further east. The smell, taste, and texture of each meal embed themselves into your memory. Every morsel feels like a connection to places you've not yet seen. You notice small, strange details too. Women in villages braid colorful threads into their hair as protective charms. Some traders wear amulets of unusual stones they claim ward off evil spirits. One fringe tidbit you hear, likely exaggerated, is that Persian merchants sometimes train falcons to deliver messages over dozens of miles. You tuck these images alongside your maps and notes, a mental scrapbook of the strange and marvelous world stretching before you. Rivers and valleys punctuate your journey, each with its own rhythm and character. You drink the cold water, feeling it revive you, and sometimes pause to sketch the terrain in crude charcoal, knowing that later these sketches might guide or entertain. The contrast between snow-capped peaks and lush valleys below makes you appreciate the Earth's variety. It is as if each step forward in Persia is a lesson in scale, beauty, and the unpredictability of travel. Occasionally, the caravan encounters traders who swap stories about distant lands. You hear rumors of Mongol armies moving swiftly like shadows, of cities built entirely of stone, and of rivers where fish leap like frogs. One quirky tale claims that some Persian villages brew a drink that makes you temporarily invisible to predators. Historians remain skeptical, but the image delights your imagination. You scribble notes furiously, not sure if you'll see any of it firsthand, yet eager to remember every oddity. By the time you descend toward the flatter plains, your legs ache, your skin is tanned and windburned, and your mind is racing. The mountains have transformed you, instilling resilience, curiosity, and a growing awareness that the world is far stranger and more intricate than Venice or the Mediterranean could ever hint. Every stumble, every whispered story, every bizarre local custom reinforces the sense that you are stepping onto a stage far larger than yourself, where your curiosity and courage will be tested in ways Venice never could. You trudge through the enormous gates of Kublai Khan's court, the smell of incense thick in the air, the clamor of servants, guards, and diplomats buzzing around you like an unpredictable orchestra. The palace is massive, a forest of carved wooden pillars, silk banners, and tiles that glint in the sunlight like scattered gemstones. You probably won't survive the first impression without being completely overwhelmed, but that's exactly the point. Kublai Khan himself is a presence that consumes the room. You watch him seated on an elevated throne, the weight of empire in his posture, his eyes both calculating and, strangely, curious. Historians still argue whether Marco Polo's accounts of the emperor's habits are literal observations or a mix of embellishment designed to impress European audiences, but from where you stand, you can almost feel the pulse of authority radiating from the man. The court is a sensory overload. Courtiers parade in robes of gold and crimson, musicians play unfamiliar instruments that squeal, drone, and hum, and exotic animals, camels, falcons, even strange reptiles move through the palace halls. You notice the gleam of coins stamped with intricate designs, stacks of paper money, and marketplaces within the palace itself. Fringe accounts suggest that Kublai once hosted races with horses tethered to flaming braziers to ward off spirits. A detail historians debate, but one that makes you blink in disbelief as your imagination paints the scene. You are tasked, surprisingly, with small duties, relaying messages, observing courtly rituals, and sometimes simply standing and absorbing everything. Every gesture, every movement, every whispered conversation carries significance. You begin noticing subtle hierarchies, the way certain officials nod slightly before speaking, how guards position themselves relative to the throne, the way courtiers subtly measure each other's favor. You file these observations away. Understanding the power dance is as crucial as understanding the geography of the empire. Meals are nothing short of theatrical. You sit at long tables where dishes you've never seen or smelled are served, from spiced meats to delicate pastries filled with nuts and honey. One peculiar dish, historians debate whether it actually existed or was exaggerated, involves fish that are supposedly frozen in ice overnight, then served with a sauce of fermented plums. The flavors are alien yet delicious, and the ceremony surrounding each course impresses upon you the importance of ritual in governance and diplomacy. Outside the palace, the empire stretches endlessly. You hear stories of cities connected by vast networks of roads, rivers teeming with trade, and caravans that traverse deserts like living threads. Kublai's empire is as much a marvel of human organization as it is a testament to ambition, and you cannot help but feel small yet exhilarated within its boundaries. You memorize the layout of the court, the colors of different banners, and the sounds of its corridors, knowing these will serve as mental anchors for tales you might one day recount. Court life is full of unexpected curiosities. You see officials wearing small bells on their boots to ward off mischievous spirits. You notice a guard who has trained pigeons to deliver short messages, a tactic historians still debate as real or symbolic. You file these mental oddities alongside the more practical lessons, diplomacy, observation, patience, and the importance of never underestimating the power of a single gesture in a world ruled by appearances. You are introduced to Kublai's fascination with inventions and science. You watch water clocks, observe paper currency exchange in miniature markets within the palace, and marvel at innovations that make Venice's finest traders look primitive. Scholars argue whether Marco Polo fully grasped these innovations or simply recorded them as exotic curiosities, but to you, the dazzling novelty is enough to inspire awe and a thirst for understanding. Evenings are quieter but no less instructive. You sit on the edges of courtyards, listening to the soft hum of distant waterfalls, the faint laughter of children, and the whisper of silk against marble floors. It is here that you begin to piece together the rhythm of Mongol governance, the interplay of power, and the subtle art of observation, skills that will become vital as you traverse even more foreign lands in the years ahead. By the time you leave the palace to continue your journey, you carry with you more than stories of riches and rituals. You carry insight into human ambition, adaptability, and the strange, beautiful idiosyncrasies that define every culture. Kublai Khan's court is a living, breathing classroom, and though you are a small figure amid its splendor, the lessons learned here shape the way you will perceive every city, caravan, and court for the remainder of your adventures. You trudge through the bustling streets of Chinese cities, the smells of roasted chestnuts, fermented tofu, and exotic spices mingling in the humid air, while merchants shout their wares in a dozen dialects that twist and curl around your ears. You probably won't survive the sensory onslaught without stopping to gape at something absurd, like a market display of dried seahorses arranged in neat little pyramids, but that's exactly why you're here. The cities themselves are labyrinths of activity. Narrow alleyways branch unpredictably, courtyards hide hidden temples, and canals thread through neighborhoods where small wooden bridges creak underfoot. Historians still argue whether Marco Polo truly traveled extensively through southern China or whether he relied on second-hand reports. But as you navigate these streets, every detail feels real, from the clatter of wooden carts to the faint squeak of rickshaw wheels. Pass artisans hammering bronze, potters shaping clay into ornate vessels, and silk weavers whose hands move so quickly they seem to blur. One quirky observation is that some townspeople dye their fabrics with pigments derived from insects, a method historians debate, but to you the vibrant reds and deep blues are indisputable. Each pattern tells a story, each shop a lesson in both trade and culture, and you start to understand that commerce and artistry are deeply intertwined here. The riverways are alive. You watch junks glide past, their sails patchworked with scraps of cloth, and merchants bartering from floating platforms. There's talk of paddle boats fitted with rudimentary signaling kites, a fringe tale historians argue about, but you imagine it vividly, picturing a fleet of tiny airborne flags communicating messages across the water. Occasionally, you even test a small paddle boat yourself, wobbling dangerously as you try to keep it straight, earning the wary stares of locals who might have thought you were mad. Temples and shrines punctuate your path. You smell incense and witness rituals involving intricate chants, swirling candles, and offerings of fruit and rice. A monk explains the use of paper charms to ward off bad luck, a practice historians still debate in terms of its widespread accuracy, and you tuck the idea into your mental scrapbook of human creativity and superstition. The gentle cadence of bell chimes, the flutter of prayer flags, and the hushed whispers of devotees offer a rhythm that balances the chaotic energy of the markets. Food is a constant revelation. You nibble on steamed buns stuffed with meat and mushrooms, sample noodles so fresh they almost slurp themselves, and taste fruits you've never seen outside dreams. One particularly quirky snack involves honey-coated scorpions on sticks, which locals swear bring good fortune. Scholars argue whether Marco Polo actually consumed these or merely recorded tales, but you nibble cautiously, savoring the combination of curiosity and mild terror. Outside the cities, the countryside offers its own lessons. Rice paddies stretch in geometric perfection, irrigation canals glint in the sunlight, and farmers move with a rhythm that seems almost choreographed. You notice peculiar local innovations, wheeled carts with bamboo frameworks, rudimentary water-lifting devices, and communal granaries designed to withstand floods. Historians still debate whether Marco Polo fully grasped these technologies or simply marveled at them, but you take careful note, sketching what you can and mentally cataloguing the ingenuity. Traveling southward, you encounter rivers so wide they seem to swallow the horizon, and hills dotted with villages where thatched roofs glimmer in morning dew. Local guides describe the use of paper kites for signaling between villages, a practice fringe enough that scholars continue to debate it, but you imagine a sky dotted with fluttering messages, the wind carrying whispers from one hilltop to another. Every unusual practice, every innovative detail, feeds your sense of wonder and teaches you that human creativity adapts to geography, necessity, and superstition alike. By the time you reach the edge of the southern provinces, your skin is tanned, your muscles honed by long walks, and your mind buzzing with impressions of cities, markets, rivers, and rituals. Each encounter reinforces the lessons of observation, adaptability, and cultural curiosity instilled in you since Venice, through the Mediterranean and across Persia. China, vast and multifaceted, leaves you both awestruck and humbled, your understanding of the world expanding as fast as the rivers you've crossed and the markets you've wandered. You trudge along the jagged coastline, the salt tang of the sea whipping against your skin, the wooden hull of your small boat creaking beneath your weight. Waves slap rhythmically against the side, a constant reminder that the sea is patient but unforgiving. You probably won't survive the first few hours without tasting seawater, or at least grimacing at the smell, but that briny discomfort becomes part of your rhythm. Maritime travel is a strange mixture of precision and chaos. You learn the subtle tilt of a vessel under different winds, the way the ropes hum when a storm gathers, and the peculiar dance of tides along shallow coves. Historians still debate whether Marco Polo personally navigated these coastal stretches or relied on accounts from experienced sailors, but as you grip the tiller, every wave feels real, every gust of wind a tutor in patience and balance. Ports along the coast are microcosms of distant worlds. You dock at villages where fishermen pull nets heavy with glimmering fish, merchants trade exotic shells for cloth, and street children dart through narrow alleys with fearless agility. One quirky anecdote you hear involves a sailor claiming that some coastal towns keep trained otters to retrieve lost cargo from the water, a tale historians argue may be myth, but your imagination seizes on it immediately. Navigation is as much art as science. You mark the positions of lighthouses, memorize the direction of prevailing winds, and learn to recognize subtle currents that can make or break a journey. Currents shift unpredictably, tides rise and fall, and the slightest miscalculation can strand your vessel on jagged rocks. You notice how the local fishermen read the water, watching for color changes, foam patterns, and the flight of seabirds, skills that you commit to memory, knowing you will need them for survival in unfamiliar waters. Life aboard the boat is repetitive yet full of surprises. You taste salted fish dried in the sun, sip brackish water filtered through cloth, and swap stories with sailors who have traversed the coast more times than you can count. Some share tall tales. One claims a ghost ship appears at twilight, crewed entirely by vanished traders, while others insist a giant sea serpent guards a hidden cove. Fringe or not, you file these away alongside practical observations, the absurdity of it all sharpening your awareness. Weather is a constant challenge. Storms arrive without warning, sending sheets of rain and waves crashing over the deck. You cling to ropes, your muscles aching, and watch the horizon darken as lightning flickers across jagged cliffs. Historians debate whether Marco Polo ever faced the full fury of these storms personally, but you feel every gust, every spray, every thrum of tension as if it is yours alone. You learn that the sea demands respect, humility, and constant attention. Coastal towns provide brief respite. You marvel at architecture adapted to tides and waves, houses on stilts, bridges of braided wood, and marketplaces raised above high water. You witness merchants using clever signaling devices, flags, bells, and occasionally paper kites to communicate across harbors. Scholars still debate the accuracy of Marco Polo's descriptions, but for you, these innovations are lessons in human ingenuity meeting environmental necessity. Food is both necessity and novelty. You sample salted herring, freshly baked flatbreads, and small crustaceans fried in oil, often accompanied by stories from locals. One eccentric fisherman insists that mixing seaweed with fish traps spirits in the water, a tale historians still argue is allegorical, yet it captures your imagination fully. Every bite, every story, every splash of seawater becomes part of the larger lesson. Survival demands curiosity as much as skill. Night brings reflection. You sit on the deck under a canopy of stars, listening to the gentle slap of waves, the distant call of night birds, and the creak of your vessel. The rhythm is meditative, and you begin connecting lessons from Venice, the Mediterranean, Persia, and China into a coherent map of experience and knowledge. Coastal travel, with all its unpredictability, reinforces patience, adaptability, and observation, qualities you now understand are as vital as courage or ambition. By the time you reach the last stretch of your southern coastal route, the sun warms your back, your muscles hum with exertion, and your mind buzzes with anticipation. You are no longer merely an observer, you are part of the maritime world, attuned to its dangers and rhythms. Every port visited, every odd story heard, every wave navigated has honed your senses and prepared you for the deserts, nomads, and distant empires still waiting in the next chapters of your journey. You trudge across the endless desert, the sun hammering your shoulders, sand seeping into every crease of your clothing, and the wind whipping tiny grains into your eyes and mouth. You probably won't survive the first day without blistered feet, cracked lips, or at least a full-blown craving for water, but that harshness is part of the lesson. The nomadic tribes you encounter are fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. Their camels move like living furniture, each step calculated, and the riders wield knowledge of the desert that borders on supernatural. Historians still argue whether Marco Polo fully crossed every desert he described, or if some accounts were hearsay, but as you shadow these nomads, their skill and endurance are undeniable. Water is precious, almost sacred. You learn to ration, to read the distant shimmer that might signal an oasis, and to listen for subtle changes in the wind that might indicate approaching sandstorms. Fringed tailies abound. One trader swears that certain desert beetles can find underground water sources, but you study these creatures intently, thinking that even the smallest desert secret might save your life. At night, the desert becomes eerily beautiful. Stars stretch across the sky in a clarity that city lights can never offer, and the dunes glow silver in moonlight. Nomadic fires crackle softly, and elders tell stories of spirits inhabiting the sand, invisible yet watching. Scholars debate whether Marco Polo ever camped with such tribes or if he relied on second-hand accounts, but for you the atmosphere is intensely real, cold on the skin, warm in the glow of shared firelight. Trade is the lifeblood of survival. You watch camel caravans exchange spices, textiles, and rare goods, all while negotiating the intricate balance of trust, reputation, and necessity. One quirky observation is that some tribes use intricate knot patterns in ropes to communicate messages. Historians still debate whether this was widespread or symbolic, but you memorize each pattern, impressed by the ingenuity of survival under such harsh conditions. The desert is deceptive. A flat expanse may hide quicksand, a cool breeze may mask the approach of a dust storm. You learn to watch for subtle signs, the way the sand shifts, the shadow of distant dunes, the behavior of small desert animals. Each lesson is reinforced by necessity. One misstep could mean hours of struggle or worse. The physical exertion combines with mental focus in a rhythm both exhausting and intoxicating. Food and shelter are minimal. You survive on dates, dried meats, and camel milk, marveling at how tribes stretch meager resources into sustenance. One fringe tale suggests that certain desert herbs can provide temporary invisibility to predators, a story historians debate, but you imagine the possibilities, filing it alongside other survival tricks that might one day save your skin. You encounter other travelers occasionally, merchants, wandering monks, and soldiers returning from distant campaigns. They share strange stories, cities buried under shifting sands, camels that navigate like compasses, and desert phenomena that defy simple explanation. Each tale, whether literal or exaggerated, adds texture to your understanding of the land and its people. Sandstorms arrive with terrifying speed, reducing visibility to almost nothing and disorienting even the most experienced guides. You cling to ropes, hands bleeding from friction, and pray that instinct and observation guide your steps. Historians debate the scale of these storms in Marco Polo's accounts, but you feel their abrasive reality, and the lesson is clear. Respect and adaptability are as crucial as strength or courage. By the time you descend into the next oasis, your skin sunburned, your throat parched, and your senses heightened, the desert has changed you. You are attuned to subtle patterns, resilient to discomfort, and keenly aware that survival is a combination of observation, adaptation, and respect for forces larger than yourself. Every dune crossed, every nomadic trick learned, every whispered story solidifies a growing mastery of the environment, preparing you for the further adventures that await across Persia, the Middle East, and beyond. You trudge along dusty caravan routes through Persia and the Middle East, the heat radiating from baked earth and the scent of exotic spices swirling in the air, as merchants shout over the clatter of hooves and wagons. You probably won't survive the first few days without feeling utterly disoriented by the sheer expanse and variety of landscapes, but every step teaches you something new about endurance and adaptation. Caravans snake across deserts and plains, connecting cities you once only heard about in whispers. You marvel at the coordination, camel drivers who seem to communicate without words, guards who scout ahead with uncanny precision, and traders negotiating deals with practiced patience. Historians still debate whether Marco Polo personally visited every city recorded or compiled accounts from multiple sources, but as you move from dusty Persian towns to bustling Middle Eastern bazaars, the experiences feel tangible, immediate, and relentless. The cities themselves are kaleidoscopes of culture. You wander through markets stacked with cinnamon, saffron, and woven fabrics, watching children dart between stalls and merchants haggle with a flair that borders on performance. One fringe tidbit involves a group of merchants who allegedly train pigeons to deliver tiny parcels across city walls, a story historians argue might be apocryphal, yet the image captivates your imagination as you watch the birds wheel gracefully above rooftops. You notice architectural ingenuity everywhere, arches that span entire marketplaces, bridges built without nails, and water systems designed to sustain enormous populations. Scholars debate whether Marco Polo fully appreciated these innovations or simply recorded them as marvels for European audiences. But for you, every detail is a lesson in human creativity and adaptability. You sketch columns, water channels, and city layouts, knowing these visual notes will serve as mental bookmarks for the stories you'll one day tell. Caravan life continues to shape your skills. You learn to ration food and water, predict weather patterns by observing the clouds, and navigate using both the sun and the stars. The deserts and plains teach you patience and observation, while the cities teach negotiation, diplomacy, and the subtle art of reading people. Every encounter with a trader, guide, or local official is a lesson in human behavior, power dynamics, and resourcefulness. Food is as much a lesson as it is sustenance. You taste roasted lamb skewers, dried fruits pressed into blocks, and unfamiliar grains cooked over small fires. One particularly quirky snack, a pastry stuffed with preserved rose petals, elicits debate among historians as to whether Marco Polo actually consumed it or merely recorded local customs, but the flavor and ritual of eating it embed themselves in your memory. The Middle Eastern nights are ethereal. Campfires flicker under vast skis, stars glitter like scattered gemstones, and the faint calls of desert wildlife punctuate the silence. Merchants and nomads alike share stories of hidden caravans, cities of gold, and rivers that vanish into sand. Historians argue about the veracity of some tales, but you soak them in, noting oddities like a tree that drips honey in the desert, or a lake that supposedly mirrors the stars perfectly. Every detail, strange or mundane, sharpens your sense of curiosity and attentiveness. Crossing mountain passes, fords, and river valleys, you witness ingenious local adaptations. Rope bridges swaying over chasms, irrigation systems channeling scarce water, and fortified caravanserais providing shelter for hundreds. Fringe or not, the practical knowledge embedded in these structures fascinates you. You begin to appreciate how survival, commerce, and culture intertwine, forming the skeleton of civilizations you once thought distant and abstract. By the time you approach the Mediterranean coast again, your body is lean and toughened, your mind buzzing with maps, observations, and stories. Every city visited, every desert crossed, and every trade interaction leaves an imprint, reinforcing the understanding that knowledge and survival are inseparable. You realize that these return journeys are not mere repetition, but opportunities to consolidate skills, observe human ingenuity in different contexts, and prepare for the final stages of your epic travels. You trudge into a dim Venetian cell, the scent of damp stone and old wood clinging to the air, as guards slam the door behind you with a resonant clang. You probably won't survive the psychological weight of captivity without moments of doubt, fear, or a creeping sense of claustrophobia, but this is where your storytelling begins in earnest. Marco Polo's captivity after a brief naval conflict gives you perspective. The world beyond Venice's canals can be brutal, unpredictable, and often absurd. Historians still argue about the exact circumstances of his capture. Some claim it was Genoese pirates, others say a naval skirmish, but the result is the same. You sit, pen in hand, recounting everything you've seen. The scribe beside you listens intently, quill scratching as he transforms your verbal memories into text. The cell is cramped but alive with stories. You recall nomads crossing deserts, bustling Persian bazaars, and the opulence of Kublai Khan's court. Even the smallest oddities, the beetle rumored to locate water, the pigeons delivering messages, the pastries stuffed with rose petals, become narrative threads, weaving fact and fanciful observation into a tapestry of adventure. One particularly quirky story involves a supposed singing horse in a distant city, a tale historians debate, but you tell it with such conviction that even your scribe chuckles. Captivity sharpens your focus. Each tale must be vivid, coherent, and compelling. You describe sensory details, the sting of saltwater on Mediterranean shores, the sun-baked dust of Persian deserts, the rhythmic hum of Chinese markets, and the crackling warmth of nomadic fires. You notice how storytelling itself becomes a tool for survival, maintaining purpose, mental acuity, and a sense of identity amidst confinement. The scribe Rusticello occasionally questions your accounts. Historians argue about how much he may have embellished your stories, but the dialogue between you is dynamic. He asks for clarity, exaggerates details for dramatic effect, and you negotiate the balance between fact and flourish. The process teaches you that narrative power often depends on what is included, what is emphasized, and what is left tantalizingly ambiguous. Outside the cell, Venice is waking to your tales. Word spreads of exotic lands, strange creatures, and magnificent rulers. One fringe anecdote you share describes a creature in Kublai Khan's court that supposedly glows in the dark and eats only roasted nuts. Historians still debate its authenticity, but the idea captures the imagination of everyone who hears it. You realize that myth and reality, when intertwined skillfully, can both entertain and inform. In this quiet confinement, you also reflect on your growth. From the canals of Venice to the deserts of Persia, the courts of China to the bustling Middle Eastern ports, every experience has honed your senses, judgment, and curiosity. Captivity offers the clarity to connect disparate experiences into a coherent narrative, and you begin to understand that storytelling itself is as much a journey as the travels that inspired it. The cell becomes your classroom. You refine observations, emphasize unusual details, and practice packing to ensure each tale grips the listener. Historians debate whether The Travels was written entirely during captivity or over years of reflection, but you experience firsthand the pressure and exhilaration of translating lived adventure into narrative. Evenings are quiet but electric with potential. Candlelight flickers across the stone walls as you pace, rehearse, and dictate stories. The rhythm of your voice, the scratch of quill on parchment, and the quiet nods of your scribe form a meditative cadence. Here, in enforced stillness, the wanderer's mind becomes a meticulous archivist, organizing chaos into memory, myth, and marvel. By the time your captivity ends, you are not merely a man returned to Venice. You are a storyteller, a chronicler of human ingenuity, folly, and beauty. Every oddity, every wonder, every stretch of desert or palace corridor is catalogued in your mind. And as you step back into the city's streets, you understand that the world's vastness, complexity, and strangeness will now live not just in memory, but in words ready to captivate generations to come.